to talk about cymatics. So what cymatics is they have a plate and you can put sand on it, put a speaker on the bottom of the plate, and you play different hertz frequencies. And for the different frequencies that you play through the speaker, the plate that the sand is sitting on ends up vibrating the sand into certain geometrical shapes, and they change depending on the hertz frequency that you're using. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about cymatics today is because I've been doing videos about the double slit experiment. I've been doing videos about the water experiments that Luc Montagnier and Masaru Emoto has been doing, and I've been talking about quantum physics and how all of that affects the world around us. So the study of cymatics is very similar to the water studies that have been being done with Masaru Emoto, because he would basically play sounds, talk, put words on water, and then they would freeze the water and they would see if the water froze into a geometrical shape or if it didn't. So the reason cymatics is interesting is because it proves that each hertz frequency, whether you can hear it or not, has a distinct pattern to that frequency. Each individual word, when you speak it, you're basically using different frequencies to pronounce that word. So I think that's kind of what gives each word different energies. So they've also been using sound frequencies in laboratory studies to levitate things. So they basically will put a speaker underneath and a speaker above, and they will oscillate them at a certain frequency, and then they will take foam balls and stick them in between the two sound frequencies, and the foam balls will actually levitate. You can also find videos where people are hooking up water hoses close to speakers, and they will turn the speaker on, and instead of the water falling straight down out of the hose, the water will actually do weird zigzag patterns based on the frequency that's coming out of the speaker. So the science is kind of proving right now that different frequencies can actually levitate things, and that different frequencies, each individual frequency actually holds its own type of energy. So that's why the study of cymatics is very interesting to me. So along with the study of cymatics, there's also what is called the Schumann Resonance. The Schumann Resonance is the resonance of planet Earth. So it said that the planet Earth oscillates or has a resonant frequency of about 7.83 hertz. So that can change periodically over time, and some people are saying that that frequency of 7.83 hertz has actually been going up over the years. Some people are saying that they actually measure the resonant frequency of the Earth to be closer to 13 or 14 hertz now, as opposed to the 7.83 hertz that it was before. So the reason that I'm interested in the Schumann resonance of the Earth is because if the Earth has a certain frequency, we're growing up and we're living in that frequency on a daily basis, and so are all the plants and animals on this planet. Like, we're evolving within that particular frequency. So if that frequency has a certain energy to it, then that means if that Schumann resonance frequency of this planet changes, then it's literally going to change everything that's connected to the planet Earth. Because now not only would you be evolving in a different hertz, but that hertz that you're evolving in now all of a sudden has a different energy attached to it. So I mean, I literally think that if the Earth had a completely different Schumann resonance for the last million years, I honestly think that life would be completely different on this planet. I think that everything would have evolved differently. I think things would be way different now than what they actually are. And I don't know how much effect that the Schumann resonance can have, but from my understanding, the Schumann resonance of our planet is connected to the magnetic poles of this planet. Earth is basically a large magnet, and we have a magnetic field around the planet that is protecting us from solar rays, from cosmic rays. It protects us from asteroids when asteroids come through our atmosphere to hit the planet. So it's basically our force field protecting us, and everyone knows that magnets do have force fields around them, because an easy experiment is to take a metal plate, put a bunch of metal filings on the plate, stick a magnet to the bottom of the plate, and you'll see all the filings move in alignment with the magnetic poles of that particular magnet. So that magnetic field is the same field that is around the entire planet. So we can't see it, but I think it's that magnetic field that's surrounding us that determines what the Schumann resonance is within the magnetic poles. Now, I'm not sure if it's possible for us to take a regular magnet and to test its resonant frequency, like inside of its magnetic poles. I don't know if that's ever been done or if we can do that, but I think it would be a very interesting thing to find out if like different sized magnets have different resonant frequencies, or if it's not the size of the magnet but it's the strength of the magnet. Maybe that has more to do with the resonant frequency of a magnet. I'm not sure. It would be interesting to find out about that, though. Taking that into consideration, that means that the resonant frequency on our planet would be most likely different than the resonant frequencies on all the other planets within our solar system. And that very likely could mean that the resonant frequency of our sun is different than the resonant frequency here on Earth. So since we also, in essence, evolved with the resonant frequency of the sun somewhat nearby, that must have, or it could have, a slight effect on the evolution that we experienced on this planet as well. So in some of my previous videos, I talked about the light frequency and sound frequency and how everything is basically tied into frequency. Like even chemical reactions are pretty much tied into frequencies, because every atom on this planet has a different amount of protons, electrons, neutrons, and because of that, it would literally give every atom a different resonant frequency. So because a gold atom has a certain resonant frequency because of its orbits and because of the atoms, because of the electrons and protons and neutrons that it's got in it, that's what determines that it's going to be a piece of gold. So with that being said, our whole solar system would have a resonant frequency all of its own as well, because we have different sized planets, they're in different orbits, we have a certain amount of planets. So that means we're kind of growing up not only in the resonant frequency of our planet, but we're growing up and evolving in the resonant frequency of our sun and our entire solar system. So it's kind of interesting when you think about the massiveness of it, because then you can take it to the level of a galaxy. So that means that the galaxy, with all the different solar systems it has in it, would literally have its own resonant frequency, which means that if our solar system, exactly the way that it is, was in a different galaxy, life could have very easily evolved completely different on this planet, even though our solar system's exactly the same, just because we changed our galaxy. So it's kind of interesting when you think about how frequencies actually determine a lot about the world that we're living in. So when I was talking about the infrared spectrum and the visual light spectrum, I never really got into talking about how there's radiation coming off of everything. So I think that this has a lot to do, like the radiation that planets are radiating. I think that that is kind of similar to and is connected to the resonant frequency that each planet is evolving in. So what scientists have done is they've taken the radiation that's coming off of each planet and they've been able to turn it into noise and turn it into a sound that we can actually hear that's within our hearing spectrum. And it's interesting because you can't actually see this radiation. Like normally we have no way of experiencing it, except for the fact that we now have built technology that can sense these type of things, and they can pick it up and they can give us some type of a reading to the radiation. And it's kind of interesting because each single planet plus our sun is all giving off different spectrums of radiation, different vibrations, I guess you could say. So when they take the radiation coming off of each planet and they turn it into a sound that we can hear, it's very crazy how differently that sound sounds for each individual single planet. So the one thing I never mentioned before is when you listen to these sounds that the scientists created of each planet, it almost gives you the idea that each planet is talking to each other planet through the radiation that they're giving off. Because if our ears can't hear that or our eyes can't see that, but if the planets are able to pick up on that energy and they're feeding off of that energy, it's almost kind of like the planets are talking to each other. Like I really doubt that the planets can literally interpret in the way that we interpret things when it comes to that, but they are interchanging energy on a frequent basis, and any exchange of energy would basically be like a communication. So whether they, hear it in the same way that we've turned it so we can hear it, like they would obviously experience it differently than what we experience it. But at the same time, it's very interesting to think about the fact that if each planet could interpret the radiation that's coming off of the other planets, like it could literally be a spoken word that they could have amongst each other. It's kind of interesting to think that, all the planets in the solar system could be communicating and could actually be aware of each other. It's kind of interesting when you think about that. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about cymatics is there's a place called Coral Castle, and I've never been to Coral Castle, but I've watched some videos about it, and apparently it is a place where a man had been constantly ordering coral rocks, and they're pretty large rocks, on truck shipments to his place. I'm not sure what year he was doing this in, but the rumors have it that the trucks would show up, he would offload it himself during the night when nobody was around. He'd have them leave the truck there, and he would unload the truck by himself, and they would come back to pick up the truck in the morning and it was empty. And he was basically taking these large coral stones and placing them all over his property and kind of making a castle. He had done a lot of things in there, and because they say that those stones were unloaded without any heavy machinery, it's always been wondered how he got those stones off and how he placed them the way that he did when he was building the Coral Castle. I guess it's down in Florida, but I've never been down to Florida, but I think it'd be an interesting place to go to. But after his passing, they said that they found some weird instruments and tools that he was using that were set up kind of in a shop, I guess, where he worked out of in there. And I guess he was, carving some of the stones and chiseling them and stuff like that. But nobody knows how he did what he did. So they're calling it like the most recent megalithic site, because just like the Egyptian pyramids are unexplainable, and we're having a hard time figuring out how the heck they did it, because with today's machinery, moving those huge stones and the fact there's huge megalithic monuments all over over the world. They don't know how we would even do it today, and yet they were doing this throughout all of human history. So the reason I think it's interesting is because some people have speculated that maybe they used levitation. They say that there's no way that we have had levitation devices like that ever in the history of our planet, and they haven't found any artifacts that would produce levitation. I find it very interesting that Cymatics and the studies that they're doing on sound are actually leading us to the understanding that levitation could maybe be possible. If you're using the right frequency and you're using the right equipment, you could maybe very likely levitate something as huge as a massive stone. Because if you can literally take sound and levitate a foam ball, like I know there's a big jump between levitating a foam ball and levitating a 10,000 ton block of stone. Like, I understand there's a huge difference between that, but the fact that you can levitate anything in the air, in midair, using sound, I think is a pretty amazing feat in and of itself. So how long is it going to be before we start levitating slightly larger objects? And how long is it until the objects get bigger and bigger to maybe the point where we will finally one day have the technology where we can levitate 10,000 ton stones? Like, you never know where technology is going to take us in the future. Now, this whole concept of cymatics and resonant frequency has led to a discussion of music and the hertz frequency that music is created on in today's society. A lot of people are saying that 432 hertz and 440 hertz, you know, there's like differences between the 2 hertz, very slight differences, but at the same time they're saying that one frequency might be a little more harmful to mankind than another frequency is. So I mean, if words can carry negative vibration and positive vibration, I mean, different hertz levels could possibly carry negative or positive vibrations as well, and of course some could be more harmonious than others. The difference between such close frequencies might not be big enough to actually notice in our existence. Like, it might make a difference, but it might not. I mean, like, these frequencies are so super close that it's just a very slight variation, and I'm sure slight variations can make a big difference, but at the same time, I don't worry myself too much about that conversation. I understand the reason why we are using the frequency that we're using when it comes to music, and it basically has to do with the breaking down of the notes and the patterns and harmonious frequencies between all the different notes that we're using. And I've heard music played in different frequencies, and sometimes it does sound a little bit better, but sometimes it doesn't sound a little bit better. I mean, I've done some research into sound frequencies and how sound frequencies, you know, could affect us. Because, I mean, when you look at cymatics and you look at how the sand changes and moves into different patterns on the plate based on the frequency that they're playing through the speaker, it's very easy to notice how some of those frequencies are more harmonious than others, how some of them make more complicated patterns, just like in Tsurumoto's water studies. Some water froze into more of a crystalline form, into more of a perfect form than others did. I mean, some have very slight variation. So I've also been looking into different ways to use sound for energy purposes, because if you think about it, if the Earth has a magnetic field, and if the resonant frequency on the planet is being created because of that magnetic field, then that resonant frequency is a sound. So I mean, it's a sound that we can't hear at 7.83 hertz. But at the same time, there could be other animals that hear that sound, even though we don't hear that sound. When I think about that, it makes me think that sound and magnetics and electricity kind of are like a trio that might work together, because if the Earth has a magnetic field, and because of the magnetic field it has a resonant frequency, then that would mean that because magnets can create energy and electricity, and we've already known that electricity can create magnetism, it seems to me like everything might possibly be a triune. So I mean, if you have a magnetic field and you have an electric field, and that's creating a resonant frequency, then all three of them are working together at the same time, which means you should be able to take a sound and you should be able to turn that sound into electricity, or you should be able to turn that sound into a magnetic field.